The call that changed everything. I've been a handyman for over 5 years now. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays the bills and keeps me busy. I've fixed everything from leaky faucets to busted electrical wiring, and I've met all sorts of people, some friendly, some rude, and some who barely acknowledged my existence. But no matter the job, it was always the same routine. Get in, fix the problem. Get paid. Leave. No drama. But today was different. The call came in early in the morning. A woman named Lila needed some help with a misaligned door in her house. "It's just a minor fix," she said over the phone. "But I'd like it done as soon as possible." Nothing unusual about that. I'd had similar requests before, but what caught my attention was the offer: $1,600 for what sounded like an hour or two of work. I almost thought she was joking. Most people hesitated when they had to pay a standard service fee, let alone that kind of money. But she sounded completely serious. Her tone was confident, like money wasn't an issue at all. "Are you sure about the price?" I asked. "Yes, I just want it done properly." I wasn't about to argue with that. "All right," I said, "I'll be there in an hour." The address she gave me led to a high-end part of town, far from the neighborhoods I usually worked in. As I drove through the clean, tree-lined streets, I couldn't help but feel out of place. Every house here was massive, the kind of homes you saw in magazines. Perfectly trimmed lawns, expensive cars parked in driveways, tall gates and security cameras everywhere. I pulled up in front of Lila's house, a modern-looking 2-story place with glass walls and sleek architecture. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my truck, grabbed my toolbox, and made my way to the front door. I rang the bell and waited. A few seconds later, the door swung open, and there she was. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. She was stunning, the kind of beautiful that made you do a double take. Blonde hair, striking green eyes, flawless skin. She had the elegance of someone who had never had to worry about money a day in her life. But what surprised me the most wasn't her looks. It was her expression. She looked relieved. "Edward?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. "Yeah, that's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thank you for coming." She smiled. Warm, genuine. "Come in." She stepped aside, and I walked in, taking in my surroundings. The house was just as impressive inside as it was outside. High ceilings, expensive furniture, everything spotless and well organized. "This way," she said, leading me down a hallway. I followed her to a large wooden door that seemed slightly out of alignment. A simple fix. I could tell right away that all it needed was a bit of sanding and a few adjustments to the hinges. I crouched down, inspecting the frame. "Looks like the wood swelled up a little," I said, running my fingers along the edges. "Might need to shave it down just a bit." She nodded. "Take your time. No rush." I got to work, focusing on the task at hand. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Most clients either stayed out of my way or made small talk about the job. But Lila was different. She lingered nearby, watching me closely, almost like she was waiting for something. I tightened the last screw, stepped back, and tested the door. Smooth as butter. "All done," I said, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "Shouldn't give you any more trouble." She walked over, running her hand along the door, testing it herself. "It's perfect," she said, smiling. "Thank you." I started packing up my tools when she suddenly reached into her wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "For your trouble," she said, handing it to me. I hesitated. The job was already well paid. A tip on top of that. "You don't have to," I insist. I took the money, feeling a bit thrown off, but before I could say anything else, she spoke again. "Actually," she said, her tone shifting slightly, "I was wondering if you might want to stay a little longer. Maybe have some coffee. Or dinner." I blinked, not sure I'd heard her right. I was just a handyman. A guy who fixed doors. Women like her didn't usually invite guys like me to stay a little longer, especially not with the kind of look she was giving me now. She must have seen the hesitation on my face because she quickly added, "I know this is probably a weird request, but honestly, things have been kind of boring lately. I haven't had any excitement in a long time, and you seem like an interesting guy." I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. She smiled. "It's just dinner. No pressure." I had no idea what to think. I could have just walked away, taken my money, and called it a day. But for some reason, I didn't want to. For the first time in a long time, I felt curious. Like maybe, just maybe, this was one of those moments in life where you took a risk, where you said yes to something unexpected. So, against all logic, I nodded. "All right," I said, trying to act casual. "Why not?" Her smile widened. "Great. I have an idea. There's a spot up on the hill where you can see the whole city. It's perfect for a little getaway." She picked up her phone. "Let me just grab a few things." I stood there, still trying to process what was happening. I had no idea where this night was going. But something told me this was just the beginning. An unexpected invitation. I sat in my truck for a moment, staring at the glowing lights of Lila's house as I processed what had just happened. This wasn't normal. I was a handyman, a guy who spent his days fixing things and moving on. My clients rarely looked at me twice, let alone invited me out for dinner. And yet, here I was, agreeing to spend the evening with a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a high-fashion magazine. A voice in the back of my mind told me this was a bad idea, that I was stepping into a world where I didn't belong. But another part of me, the part that had been yearning for something more, refused to listen. With a deep breath, I turned the key in the ignition and drove home to change. I didn't own fancy clothes, but I tried my best. A clean button-up shirt, dark jeans, and my best pair of boots. It was as good as it was going to get. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. What was I even doing? Was this just some rich woman's way of passing time? Was she messing with me? Or was there something real to this? Before I could overthink it, my phone buzzed. "Lila, meet me at the hill in an hour. Can't wait." I exhaled slowly. This was happening. Grabbing my keys, I headed out. The drive to the hilltop was quiet. I had been there a few times before, mostly on nights when I wanted to escape the noise of the city. It was a peaceful place, high above everything, with a breathtaking view of the skyline. As I pulled up, I saw her standing there, a picnic basket in one hand, looking out over the city with a soft, contemplative expression. She turned as I approached, and when our eyes met, she smiled. "You came," she said, as if she had been holding her breath. I chuckled, rubbing the back of my neck. Well, I wasn't sure if this was real or not. She laughed, a genuine, melodic sound. "I don't blame you. I probably sounded a little crazy inviting you out like this." I raised an eyebrow. "So, what's the real reason? You trying to mess with the handyman for fun?" Her smile softened. "No, nothing like that." She glanced back at the city lights. I don't know. I wanted to spend time with someone different. Someone real." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Lila spread out a blanket on the grass and started unpacking the picnic basket. Wine, cheese, bread, fresh fruit. Nothing too extravagant, but definitely a step up from my usual dinner. We sat down, and for a few moments, we simply enjoyed the silence. Then she spoke. "Tell me about yourself." I scoffed. "Not much to tell. I'm just a guy who fixes things." She rolled her eyes. "Come on. There's more to you than that." I hesitated, not used to being the center of attention like this, but something about her made me want to open up. "I grew up in a small town," I started. "Dropped out of college when my dad got sick. Worked odd jobs until I picked up handyman work. Been doing it ever since." She listened intently, as if every word mattered. "No wife? No girlfriend?" she asked. I smirked. "No time. Or no one worth your time." I paused, surprised by how easily she saw through me. "Maybe." She nodded, pouring us both a glass of wine. "I get that." I leaned back, watching her. "What about you? What's your story?" Her gaze flickered downward for a moment. "I grew up in this world. Money, privilege, expectations, but it never felt like my own life. Just something I was born into." There was a sadness in her voice that caught me off guard. "Is that why you asked me here?" I asked. "Because I'm not from that world." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe I just liked the way you looked at me. Like I was a person, not a price tag." That hit me harder than I expected. For the next hour, we talked. About childhood memories, favorite books, embarrassing stories. It was the kind of conversation you have with an old friend, not someone you just met. At some point, we both lay back on the blanket, staring up at the sky. The stars stretched out above us, the city lights glowing below. "I don't usually do this," she admitted. "Me neither." She turned her head to look at me, her green eyes reflecting the moonlight. And then, before I even realized what was happening, she leaned in. Her lips brushed against mine, soft, hesitant, a question more than a statement. I could have pulled away, should have, but I didn't. I kissed her back, and in that moment, everything else faded away. The drive home felt like a dream. I replayed the night over and over in my head. The laughter, the quiet confessions, the kiss. I should have felt out of place. But I didn't, and that scared me more than anything. Because this wasn't just a job anymore. This was something else. Something I wasn't sure I was ready for. The lines began to blur. The morning after felt different. I woke up still replaying the events of the previous night. The quiet hilltop, the way Lila had looked at me, the softness of her lips against mine. It wasn't just the kiss that had stuck with me. It was the way I felt in her presence, like I had stepped into a world that wasn't mine, but for some reason, welcomed me anyway. I wasn't used to this. Women like Lila didn't just show up in my life. They didn't invite me on spontaneous adventures, listen to my stories, or look at me as if I was someone worth knowing. Yet she had. And now I had no idea what to do about it. I sighed, sitting up on the edge of my bed and running a hand through my hair. The logical part of me wanted to chalk this up to a one-time thing, a fleeting moment of connection between two people from different worlds. Maybe Lila had been bored, looking for a temporary distraction, and I just happened to be there. But the way she had kissed me, the way she had lingered after, looking at me like she wasn't ready for the night to end, it felt like something more. My phone buzzed. For a second, I hesitated before reaching for it. "Lila." "Morning, Edward. Hope I didn't make things weird last night." I had fun. I exhaled, not realizing I had been holding my breath. Weird? No. Confusing? Yes. I stared at the screen, wondering how to respond. Should I play it cool? Pretend like it was nothing? No, that wasn't me. I typed back. Me, not weird. I had fun too. A reply came almost immediately. Lila. Good. I was wondering. Want to see me again today? I blinked at the screen. This was moving fast. Maybe too fast. I should have hesitated. I should have thought things through. Instead, I found myself typing back. Me. Yeah. When and where? Later that afternoon, Lila picked me up. That was another thing I wasn't used to. Being driven around in a luxury car by a woman who looked like she had stepped off a movie set. I slid into the passenger seat, feeling strangely out of place as the leather interior swallowed me. You clean up well, she said, glancing at me with a smirk. I had tried to put in a little effort, not too much, but enough to make sure I didn't look like a guy who spent most of his days covered in sawdust and grease. Yeah, well, I said, shrugging. Didn't want to embarrass you in your fancy car." She laughed. "Trust me, Edward, you're not an embarrassment." Her words sent a strange warmth through me, but I pushed it down. "Where are we going?" I asked. "You'll see." She pulled out onto the road, navigating effortlessly through the city streets. I watched her as she drove, how her fingers gripped the steering wheel, how the sunlight caught in her hair. Everything about her seemed effortless, but there was something else beneath the surface, something she hadn't let me see yet, and I wanted to see it. We ended up at a quiet spot by the waterfront, a small private dock with a boat waiting for us. I turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "A boat? Is this the part where you throw me overboard?" She grinned. "Not unless you deserve it." I followed her onto the deck, feeling the slight rock of the boat beneath my feet. She moved like she had done this 1,000 times before, completely at ease. "You do this often?" I asked as she started the engine. "Sometimes," she said, glancing over at me. "When I need to clear my head." I nodded, understanding more than I cared to admit. As the boat moved out into open water, the city skyline faded into the distance. The air smelled like salt and freedom, the sun warm on my skin. For a while, we didn't say much. We just sat there, letting the quiet settle between us. Then she broke the silence. "I left home when I was 18, she said, her voice softer now. "Ran as far away as I could. Thought if I put enough distance between me and my family, I'd finally feel like my own person." I turned to her, surprised by her sudden openness. "Did it work?" I asked. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Not really. Money follows you, no matter where you go. People treat you differently when they know who you are, what you have. I wanted something real, something that wasn't tied to my last name." She glanced at me, her green eyes unreadable. "That's why I asked you out last night. You didn't look at me like everyone else does." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. So I told her the truth. "I don't care about your last name," I said. "I just care about the person sitting in front of me." Her lips parted slightly, like she hadn't expected that answer. Then, without another word, she reached over and took my hand. It wasn't a grand gesture, it was simple, but in that moment, it felt like the most significant thing in the world. I squeezed her hand back, and for the first time, I stopped wondering if I belonged here. I just let myself be. Uncharted waters. The steady hum of the boat's engine mixed with the gentle crash of waves as we drifted further into open water. The city skyline had faded into the distance, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about work, bills, or the routine of my life. I was just here, with her. Lila's fingers were still wrapped around mine, her grip firm yet delicate, like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. There was something about the moment, something quiet and unspoken, that made my heart race. "You okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, looking at her. "Yeah, just. I wasn't expecting any of this." She smiled, but there was a sadness to it. "Me neither." I studied her for a moment, trying to figure her out. Lila was a puzzle, one I wasn't sure I had the right pieces for. She had money, luxury, everything a person could want. But beneath it all, there was something else, something missing. She turned away from me, staring at the horizon, her expression distant. "You ever feel like you're just existing?" she asked suddenly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "Like you're moving through life, doing what you're supposed to do, but none of it feels real." I knew that feeling all too well. I thought about all the years I had spent fixing things, doors, pipes, broken furniture. I had become so used to repairing what was in front of me that I had never stopped to think about what was broken inside me. "I guess," I admitted. "But I never really had the luxury of thinking about it too much. I work, I pay my bills, I keep moving forward." She looked at me, her green eyes piercing. "And that's enough for you?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that my life was fine the way it was. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. What about you? I asked. You've got everything. Why does it feel like you're still searching for something? She let out a small, humorless laugh. Because money doesn't fix everything. It just hides the cracks. That hit harder than I expected. For a long moment, we just sat there, letting the silence stretch between us. The wind played with her hair, the sunlight reflecting off the water like scattered diamonds. Then, without warning, she stood up and pulled off her jacket. I blinked. What are you doing? She grinned, kicking off her sandals. We're in the middle of the ocean. Might as well enjoy it. Before I could protest, she leaped off the side of the boat, hitting the water with a splash. For a second, I just stood there, stunned. Then her head popped back up above the surface, laughing. Come on, Edward. Live a little. I shook my head, chuckling. You're crazy. She splashed water in my direction. And you're boring. Get in here. I hesitated. It had been years since I had done anything remotely spontaneous. My life was built on routine, predictability. But as I stood there, looking at Lila floating in the water, laughing without a care in the world, I realized something. I didn't want to be predictable anymore. With a deep breath, I pulled off my shirt, kicked off my boots, and jumped. The water was cold at first, shocking my system awake. But as I surfaced, gasping for air, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Alive. Lila grinned. Took you long enough. I splashed water in her direction, making her laugh. Happy now? Very. We floated there for a while, letting the waves carry us. There was something freeing about being out here, away from everything. No expectations, no responsibilities. Just the two of us, weightless in the open sea. You're not what I expected, she said after a while. I glanced at her. What did you expect? She shrugged. Most guys, when they find out I have money, either try to impress me or use me. But you, she paused, studying me. You don't treat me like I'm different. You don't try to be someone you're not. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. So I didn't. Instead, I just reached for her hand again, feeling the way her fingers fit between mine. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. By the time we climbed back onto the boat, the sun was beginning to set, casting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Lila handed me a towel, wrapping one around herself as she sat down beside me. I needed this, she admitted, her voice soft. I nodded. Me too. We sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon. There was something peaceful about the moment, something unspoken that neither of us needed to say out loud. But as much as I wanted to hold on to this feeling, I knew reality was waiting for us. What happens now? I asked. She turned to me, her expression unreadable. What do you want to happen? I hesitated. Because for the first time in a long time, I had no idea what I wanted. But I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want to walk away from this. From her. And I had a feeling she didn't want that either. As the boat rocked gently beneath us, she reached up, brushing a strand of wet hair from my face. Then, before I could think too much about it, she kissed me. And just like before, everything else faded away. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise. That whatever this was, wherever it was heading, neither of us was ready to let go. Drifting into the unknown. The kiss lingered, unspoken words passing between us as the boat gently swayed beneath the twilight sky. The sun had nearly set, leaving behind streaks of burnt orange and deep violet stretching across the horizon. The cool breeze carried the scent of salt water, mixing with the warmth of Lila's skin as she pulled away just enough to rest her forehead against mine. Her breath was uneven, and so was mine. I wasn't the type of guy to overthink things, but this was different. It wasn't just about attraction. It was something deeper, something neither of us seemed ready to name. I don't know what this is, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Neither do I, she murmured. But I don't want it to stop. Neither did I. She leaned back against the cushioned seat, pulling her towel tighter around herself as she gazed at the horizon. You ever feel like you're waiting for something, but you don't know what it is? I let out a dry chuckle. Yeah, every day. She turned to me, curiosity flickering in her green eyes. What do you mean? I ran a hand through my damp hair, sighing. I spent most of my life fixing things for other people. Houses, furniture, plumbing, even their problems sometimes. But I never really stopped to think about what I was doing for myself, what I was working toward. I guess I just fell into the routine. She nodded as if she understood. And you're afraid that if you stop moving, you'll realize you don't know where you're going. I blinked at her, surprised at how easily she had put it into words. Yeah, something like that. A soft smile tugged at her lips. I feel the same way. It was strange, hearing that from someone like her. A woman with wealth, beauty, and a life most people could only dream of. And yet she was searching for something too. We sat in silence for a while, watching the last of the sun disappear beyond the water. The gentle rocking of the boat and the rhythmic lapping of the waves filled the space between us, neither of us in a rush to break the moment. Then, just as I thought she was about to say something, Lila suddenly stood up. "Let's go," she said, tossing me a dry shirt from a small storage compartment. I raised an eyebrow. "Where?" She grinned. "Somewhere warm." "I'm starving." A night of firsts. The restaurant she picked was the kind of place I wouldn't have dared to set foot in on my own. The moment we walked through the doors, I felt the weight of the eyes that flickered in our direction. Men in tailored suits, women in elegant dresses, expensive chandeliers casting a golden glow over polished marble floors. And then there was me, dressed in simple jeans and a button-up shirt. I stuck out like a sore thumb. But if Lila noticed, she didn't show it. "Table for two," she said to the hostess, flashing a polite smile. The young woman nodded quickly, leading us to a corner table overlooking the waterfront. Lila walked with confidence, completely unfazed by the curious stares we were getting. I sat down across from her, trying not to fidget under the weight of it all. "You look uncomfortable," she observed, her lips curving into an amused smirk. "I'm just not used to places like this," I admitted, glancing around at the crystal-clear wine glasses and the overpriced menu. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Want me to tell you a secret?" I raised an eyebrow. "Go for it." She tilted her head playfully. "Neither am I." I scoffed. "Yeah, right. I'm serious." She gestured around. "My family dragged me to these kinds of places all the time, but I never felt like I belonged. I always felt like I was playing a part, pretending to enjoy it because it was expected." Her fingers tapped against the table. "But tonight, I actually want to be here, because I'm here with you." I stared at her, my mind struggling to wrap around what she was saying. Before I could reply, the waiter appeared, taking our orders. Lila ordered effortlessly, while I just picked something that sounded vaguely familiar. When the waiter left, she reached for her wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid before taking the slow sip. "So tell me," she said, setting the glass down, "what's the wildest thing you've ever done?" I huffed out a laugh. "Wild? Me?" She arched an eyebrow. "Don't tell me you've never done anything crazy." I thought about it for a moment. Once I drove across 3 states to help a friend fix his roof after a hurricane. Didn't think twice about it. Just got in the truck and left. Her lips curled into a smile. "That's not crazy. That's just who you are." I shrugged. "Maybe. But what about you? What's the wildest thing you've ever done?" She leaned back, pretending to think. I invited my handyman to dinner and jumped off a boat with him." I chuckled, shaking my head. "All right, you win." The food arrived, and we ate, our conversation flowing easily between bites. She told me about her childhood, the expectations placed on her, the way she had tried to carve out a life of her own. I told her about my years on the road, the odd jobs, the people I had met along the way. Somewhere between the laughter and the stolen glances, I realized something. I wasn't just enjoying her company. I wanted to know her. Really know her. Not just the rich girl who had grown up in privilege. Not just the woman who had hired me to fix her door. I wanted to understand the parts of her that no one else saw. And that scared the hell out of me. The question that changed everything. After dinner, we stepped outside onto the restaurant's terrace, the night air crisp and cool against my skin. Lila leaned against the railing, looking out at the city lights reflecting off the water. "I don't want this to be the last time," she said suddenly. I turned to her. "It doesn't have to be." She exhaled, her breath visible in the cold night air. "I've always been good at running away from things. But this feels different." I swallowed, unsure of what to say. She turned to face me fully. "Edward, what do you want?" The question hung in the air between us. I could have given her a simple answer. I could have told her that I wanted another night like this, another adventure, another kiss under the stars. But that wasn't the truth. What I wanted, what I really wanted, was her. Not just for a night. Not just for a fleeting moment. I wanted to see where this led, even if it scared me. Even if it didn't make sense. So I stepped closer, cupping her face in my hands. "I want you," I said, my voice steady. "And I don't care what that means." She blinked, surprised by my honesty. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her lips. "Good," she whispered, "because I want you too." And with that, she kissed me again. And this time, it wasn't just a kiss. It was the beginning of something I couldn't walk away from. Even if I wanted to. Crossing the line. I had no idea what was happening to me. Everything in my life had been predictable before Lila. My work, my schedule, my routine. It all ran like clockwork. But now I was standing on the terrace of a high-end restaurant, kissing a woman I had met barely a few days ago, a woman whose world was nothing like mine. And yet, in that moment, nothing else mattered. The city lights twinkled behind her, the cool night breeze sending shivers down my spine. Lila's hands rested against my chest, her fingers curling slightly into the fabric of my shirt, as if grounding herself. When we finally pulled away, her green eyes locked onto mine, searching. "This is insane," she whispered. I nodded, still catching my breath. "Yeah, but it feels right," she added. I couldn't argue with that. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, our foreheads nearly touching, our breath mingling in the cold night air. Then she took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. "Come with me," she said. I frowned. "Where?" She smirked. "Does it matter?" It should have. I should have asked questions. I should have hesitated. But I didn't. Because with Lila, hesitation didn't exist. A world I didn't belong to. We ended up back at her house. As we pulled into the long, winding driveway, I felt the creeping sense of being out of place again. The house was even more impressive at night, its towering windows glowing warmly against the dark sky. I followed her inside, trying to ignore the nagging voice in my head that reminded me I had only met this woman a few days ago. This was crazy. And yet, as she led me into her home, I felt an undeniable pull, like I was walking towards something inevitable. She tossed her keys onto a glass table near the entrance and turned to face me. "Drink?" she asked, heading toward a sleek, modern-looking bar in the corner of the room. I nodded, still taking in the space. It was different from what I expected. Cozy, warm. It didn't scream wealth the way some rich people's houses did. It felt lived in. She poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed me one, her fingers brushing mine. "To what?" I asked, lifting my glass slightly. She thought for a moment. "To not running away." I smirked. "Is that what we're doing?" Her expression softened. "I don't know." Neither did I. We took a sip, the warmth of the whiskey spreading through me. Then she walked toward the fireplace, switching it on with the press of a button. Flames roared to life instantly, casting flickering shadows across the room. She turned back to me, her expression unreadable. "Sit with me," she said, patting the couch. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew the second I sat down, there would be no turning back. I wasn't sure what this was, what it meant. All I knew was that I wanted to find out. So, I sat. Lila curled her legs beneath her, sipping her whiskey as she studied me. "You're different," she said after a while. I let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, how?" She tilted her head, as if trying to put it into words. "You don't try to impress me. You don't act like I'm some prize to win." I shrugged. "You're a person, not a trophy." Her lips parted slightly, like no one had ever said that to her before. Then, without warning, she leaned in. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just heat. Her lips met mine, slow at first, testing. But when I responded, pulling her closer, the hesitation vanished. She melted against me, her fingers threading through my hair as she deepened the kiss. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where this was going. All I knew was that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking. I was just feeling. More than just a moment. Somewhere between the kisses and the soft murmurs of our names, we ended up in her bedroom. It was large but not extravagant, minimalistic, with soft lighting and white sheets that felt like silk beneath my fingertips. She pulled me toward the bed, her breath warm against my skin as she whispered, "Stay." I didn't answer. I just kissed her again. And in that moment, nothing else existed. Not the differences between our worlds. Not the uncertainty of tomorrow. Just us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. Even if it wouldn't last. The morning after, I woke up to the soft glow of morning light streaming through the curtains. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then, I felt the warmth of Lila's body pressed against mine, her head resting on my chest, her fingers lazily tracing circles against my skin. I inhaled deeply, taking in the scent of her, lavender and something else, something uniquely her. She stirred, mumbling sleepily. "Morning." I glanced down at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Morning," I murmured. She looked up at me, a slow smile spreading across her lips. I should have felt awkward. I should have felt like I had made a mistake. But I didn't. I felt right. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She stretched, groaning slightly as she sat up. I can't remember the last time I woke up next to someone and felt normal. I smirked. "I'm your definition of normal." She laughed, shaking her head. "No, but you feel real. That's better." I didn't know what to say to that. So I just pulled her back down beside me, wrapping an arm around her waist. We lay there in silence for a while, neither of us in a hurry to leave the moment. Then Lila sighed. "This is the part where reality comes back, isn't it?" I ran a hand down my face. "Yeah." Neither of us moved, because we both knew that last night had changed something. That whatever this was, it wasn't just a one-night thing. It was something more. And that scared the hell out of both of us. A new beginning or a beautiful lie. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of Lila's breathing as she rested against my chest. The warmth of her skin, the scent of lavender in her hair, the quiet peace that settled between us. It all felt too perfect, too good to be real. Because things like this didn't happen to guys like me. I wasn't the type to wake up next to a woman like Lila in a bed that probably cost more than everything I owned. I wasn't the guy who got swept into a whirlwind romance, breaking every unspoken rule between two people from different worlds. Yet here I was, and I had no idea what to do next. Her fingers lazily traced circles on my chest as she murmured, half asleep, "You're thinking too much." I smirked. "And how would you know that?" She lifted her head slightly, green eyes peering up at me. "Because you're too quiet. And when you're quiet, I can practically hear the gears in your head turning. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's just, I don't know what happens now. Lila was silent for a moment, then rolled onto her side, propping her head up on her hand. What do you want to happen? I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't just some beautiful woman I had spent the night with. She was something else, someone who had come into my life, unexpectedly, and made me question everything. I had spent years stuck in a routine, never looking beyond the next job, the next paycheck. Now, for the first time, I was thinking about something more. About her. About us. I don't want this to be a one-time thing, I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. Her expression softened. Neither do I. That should have been enough to put my mind at ease. But there was something in the way she said it, something hesitant, unsure. And that was the moment I knew. She wanted this. She wanted me. But there was something else standing in the way. Something she wasn't telling me. Cracks in the perfect picture. We spent the rest of the morning in that strange, delicate space between intimacy and reality. I made breakfast. Nothing fancy, just eggs and toast. And she sat on the counter, watching me with an amused smile. Didn't peg you as the domestic type, she teased. I smirked, flipping the eggs in the pan. Everyone's gotta eat. After breakfast, we sat by the window, drinking coffee, neither of us rushing to break the quiet. It felt normal. And that was the problem. This wasn't normal. This was something built on borrowed time. And I knew it. I just didn't know when the clock would run out. The real world comes knocking. I should have seen it coming. I should have known that a morning this perfect couldn't last. The knock on the door was sharp, precise. Lila tensed immediately, her coffee cup pausing midair. I frowned, expecting someone. She hesitated, then set her cup down. Stay here. I watched as she smoothed her hair, straightened her shirt, and walked toward the door with a kind of practiced grace that only came from years of dealing with things I couldn't understand. She opened it, and the moment I heard the voice on the other side, I knew everything was about to change. Lila, a man said smoothly, his voice laced with quiet authority. We need to talk. I didn't recognize him, but something about the tone sent a chill down my spine. Lila's voice was calm, controlled. Now's not a good time. The man let out a dry chuckle. It wasn't a request. I moved toward the hallway, keeping myself out of sight, but close enough to hear. I told you, I'm handling it, Lila said, her voice sharper now. Doesn't look like it from where I'm standing. The man replied. You're playing house with some handyman while your father is expecting you to. Don't. Lila cut him off, her voice low and dangerous. A beat of silence. Then the man sighed. Lila, you can't run forever. Sooner or later, you'll have to come back. I said I'm handling it. Another pause. Then, a quieter voice. I hope you know what you're doing. Footsteps. A door closing. Silence. I waited, my heart pounding. Then Lila appeared, her face unreadable. Who was that? I asked. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. No one important. I stared at her. That didn't sound like no one. She exhaled, running a hand through her hair. Edward, please. Let's just not do this right now. I could feel it. The shift. Last night, she had let me in. But now she was shutting the door just as quickly. Lila, I said carefully, what's going on? She looked at me for a long time. Then, finally, she spoke. There's something I need to tell you. The truth hurts. We sat on the couch, the warmth from earlier completely gone. Lila took a deep breath. My father is powerful, controlling. He spent his whole life building a name for himself, and he expects me to do the same. I frowned. So what? He doesn't like who you date. She let out a dry laugh. It's not that simple. I waited, letting her gather her thoughts. Then she dropped the bombshell. He's been arranging my marriage. I stared at her. What? She looked away. It's not official. Not yet, but it's been in the works for a long time. And if he finds out about you? I swallowed hard. Then what? She hesitated. Then softly. Then he'll make sure you disappear. The words felt like a punch to the gut. I let out a slow breath, trying to process it. So, what are you saying? That this, whatever this is, it can't happen. She reached for my hand, gripping it tightly. I don't know. I don't want that to be true. But my father, he's not someone you say no to. I shook my head. So what? You're just gonna let him control your life. Marry someone you don't love. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them away. I don't know what to do, Edward. I clenched my jaw. I do. She looked at me, hope flickering in her expression. I squeezed her hand. We run. Her breath hitched. What? I cupped her face in my hands, forcing her to look at me. Screw your father. Screw his money, his expectations. We leave. Right now, you and me. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. And go where? Anywhere, somewhere he can't reach us. She closed her eyes, as if she was picturing it. Then a sob broke from her lips. Edward, I'm scared. I pulled her into my arms. Me too. But fear didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I knew what I wanted. And I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. Not even a man powerful enough to destroy me. Lila and I were standing at the edge of something dangerous. And we were about to jump. A leap into the unknown. Lila clung to me like I was her lifeline, her quiet sobs muffled against my chest. I held her tightly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, feeling the weight of everything crashing down around us. This was bigger than just us. It wasn't just about two people from different worlds trying to make it work. It was about escaping a life that had been planned out for her since the moment she was born. And it was about me choosing something, someone, for the first time in my life, instead of just going through the motions. She pulled away slightly, her tear-streaked face looking up at me. You really think we can do this? I cupped her face, wiping away a stray tear with my thumb. I don't just think it. I know it. Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. He'll come after us. I nodded. Let him. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't some empty promise. It was the truth. I had nothing to lose. But Lila, she had everything to gain. She took a shaky breath. Okay. That one word was all I needed. We were running. Breaking the chains. The plan came together quickly. We'd packed light, just the essentials. She grabbed a bag of clothes, a few personal belongings, and some cash from a safe hidden behind a painting in her bedroom. How much is in there? I asked, watching as she stuffed thick stacks of bills into a duffel bag. She smirked. Enough to disappear for a while. I shook my head. Of course you have an emergency escape fund. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time since this whole thing started. And for a brief moment it felt normal again. Like this was just another adventure. Like we weren't about to flip our lives upside down. I grabbed my phone, pulling up an old contact. A friend. Someone who owed me a favor. Hey, I said when he picked up. I need a car. No questions asked. He hesitated. Then, where do you need it? Southside Docks. Midnight. Done. I hung up, turning back to Lila. Midnight. I said. We get out of here. Drive until we're ghosts. She swallowed hard, gripping my hand. No words were needed. We were all in. The escape. The minutes ticked by like hours as we waited for nightfall. Every noise outside made us freeze, expecting the worst. But no one came. Not yet. By the time we slipped out of her house, the city was cloaked in darkness, the streets quiet. I drove, my hands gripping the wheel a little too tight as Lila sat beside me, her eyes flickering toward the rearview mirror every few seconds. No one was following us. Yet, when we reached the docks, my friend was already waiting, leaning against an old sit-in. Nothing fancy, but reliable. Full tank. No trackers, he said, tossing me the keys. Drive smart. I nodded. Appreciated. He glanced at Lila, then back at me. You sure about this? I looked at her, at the way her fingers trembled slightly, at the way her eyes held both fear and hope at the same time. I wasn't just sure. I was certain. Yeah, I said. I am. He nodded. Then get moving. The road to freedom. We drove through the night, heading west, leaving behind everything we knew. Lila stared out the window, silent for a long time. Then, finally, she spoke. I've never done this before, she admitted. Done what? I asked. She turned to me. Chosen my own life. I reached over, squeezing her hand. Well, you just did. She smiled, but it was tinged with something bittersweet. Because we both knew this wasn't going to be easy. Running wasn't the hard part. It was staying gone that would be the real challenge. But as we drove into the unknown, with nothing but the open road ahead of us, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't fixing something for someone else. I wasn't just surviving. I was living. And Lila, she wasn't just running. She was finally free. Whatever happened next, we would face it together. And that was all that mattered. Epilogue. The price of freedom. Months later, in a small coastal town where no one knew our names, I watched Lila laugh as the ocean breeze played with her hair. She looked different now. Happier, lighter, real. I wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close as we watched the waves crash against the shore. Do you regret it? I asked quietly. She turned to me, her green eyes shining. Not for a second. I kissed her, tasting the salt of the sea and the sweetness of freedom. We had risked everything. But in the end, we had won. And for the first time in both our lives, we were exactly where we were meant to be. Together. The handyman and the woman who was never meant to be his. A story that should have never happened. But somehow, against all odds, it did. And that was enough.